So I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors and advertisers, NORC, UCLA, Data Fortune Davis Research. Truly a lot of very value-priced offerings, and we couldn't do it without these sort of sponsorships. If you're interested in supporting PAPOR, please contact Natalie. It's sponsorship@papor.org. All right, so that's the disclaimer stuff. Let's jump into the fun part of the presentation. We're going to have 3 different stories here from Mollyann Brodie, Jessica Broome, and Floyd Ciruli. And we'll do each one at one time, and there's questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over to Mollyann Brodie. One second here. Molly, can you, there we go. Let me spotlight you.
Where am I? Hi, I'm staring at myself. I want to stare at the rest of you.
Oh, we're not letting them, we're just doing you for now.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Go ahead, you're going to start, right?
Yes, let me share you can share my screen, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so you already went past my elevator pitch. You were supposed to tell them my elevator pitch.
Oh, let me go there. All right, so did you introduce yourself, Molly?
Okay, so my elevator pitch. I am a public opinion expert who focuses on people's views and experiences with healthcare and health policy. But even more, I consider myself an organizational leader, a team builder, and a mentor. It's kind of my favorite role. I am passionate about helping people on their journey to find their true path in their careers, their families, and their communities. So that's my elevator pitch, which, yeah, is a pitch, but that doesn't really say much. But that's the pitch. That's what I do, and then who I consider myself to be. I guess that's the way to start. So why don't you go to the next slide? And as I was thinking about what to share with you all today, I realized that whenever I talk about sort of my story or like how I got where I am today, you can always put together this nice linear story, this clear path of how this led to this, and this led to this, and this led to this. And it seems so, easy or linear or obvious. And, the bottom line is it's never actually that way in reality. At each and every moment, it was making hard choices that I wasn't sure about, filled with a lot of uncertainty and not knowing where something's going to lead. Trying to trust my gut, but getting a lot of opinions and influence from other people. Having to close doors in order to trust that maybe other doors would open. And so I'm hoping that over the course of this, few minutes with you, I can give you a sense of that part too, because I don't want anybody to think that you you have a nice linear starting point. I want to be this, and this is how I got there. It just never works that way. It's always a variety of factors that influence how you get where you are. So right now I'm at KFF. I have been here for a very, very long time. My current role has multiple hats. I do some management and operations work, and I also still, because it's my passion, oversee sort of all of our public opinion work. Our team, I hope many of you are familiar with them. They're all heavily involved in PAPOR. Many of them are here right now. I think Melicia's here. I think Audrey's here. Ashley's here. Bianca, former, we call ourselves a poser. Poser is here. I think Grace Sparks is here. Anyway, the polling team at KFF does a lot of things really for the last 15 months or last, I don't know, whatever. We've been pivoted and done almost exclusively COVID related work, particularly around people's attitudes and opinions about the vaccine. In addition to that, I sort of always maintain a direct relationship with AAPOR and serve on one or more committees or ad hoc groups. Right now, I'm working with the transition team who's trying to help AAPOR find a new future management situation. And then I also spend a fair amount of time volunteering for my synagogue. And funny enough, my synagogue is also in the middle of a big transition where our rabbi has left us and we're in a rabbinical transition, which if anybody is part of any organization, any leadership transition is complicated. That one is complicated as well. So that's how I'm spending my time. The things I really love to spend my time on are with my granddaughter, with my dog, with my friends, hiking, wine, more wine. And I really someday want to run a puppy play group or be a sommelier. So you guys decide which one it should be. Okay, next one. This is what I did for education. I started at UCLA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, I sort of went in thinking I was going to be a doctor, right? Because that's what you think about when you're interested in healthcare. I did a BS in kinesiology, which is really human physiology. And then after some period, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as coming up, I ended up at Harvard just studying health policy and management initially at the Harvard School of Public Health. And after I got a master's there, I entered into a PhD program that was university-wide, that was focused on health policy and was an interdisciplinary program. Through all that, I learned tons and tons and tons, but quite frankly, I came out without all the details and the specific survey-related knowledge I needed. I didn't know how to weight data. I didn't even know how to do stratified sampling, all this kind of stuff. I learned all that through AAPOR and AAPOR short courses and conferences and webinars. So that's sort of the first lesson, is your education is never your end point. It's a beginning point, and over the course of your career, you continue to learn things. I love AAPOR. I love PAPOR. I've been a PAPOR president. I've been an AAPOR president. I think this is an amazing organization, and we can talk a lot about that in Q&A. Okay, next. Okay, here's where I want to spend most of the time. Bob asked us to pick kind of 4 moments that were kind of pivotal, and in us sort of ending up where we are, our career. So the first one I want to take is when I got to be a hospital administration intern at a San Mateo County hospital, which is a public hospital. And this was during my sophomore year of college. So I entered college, like I think many people, not really clear what they want to do, but sort of I always was passionate about health and healthcare. And I don't know where that came from. I had been a candy striper. I had been hurt a lot through sports. I ended up with a lot of time in the ER. I don't know. I really just always felt really comfortable in that kind of environment. And of course, as a young person, I thought that meant I had 2 options, right? I could be a doctor, I could be a hospital administrator. And so I was in school doing all my science work so I could go to med school. And I said, well, I should figure out what hospital administration is and see if I want to do that instead. So I got this opportunity, and I spent a summer at a county hospital working with the administrative team, which was just an amazing opportunity that they let somebody who had absolutely no skills do. But more importantly, there was this particular moment where the head of the hospital took me to a county supervisor meeting, and I watched the elected officials, the county officials, basically be debating the budget and the policies and stuff that would then impact the health of the county residents and of our hospital. And I had never put 2 and 2 together before, that politics and politicians had such an influence on actually healthcare outcomes. And so that was a really critical moment in my thinking. I'm like, oh, it's more than just doctors or hospital administrators that impact healthcare and people and people's lived experiences. And so I guess the lesson from that is that not all paths are clear. And sometimes when you take opportunities, you see that there's a whole nother arena, a whole nother opening of opportunities. So that was that critical moment. The next critical moment, so some things happened and I had a job and then I did other things. Anyway, I got to Harvard knowing that I was interested in healthcare. And at that point, knowing that I wanted the right answer, right? That there had to be right answers in terms of how to make people's healthcare lives better and to make this healthcare system work better for people, whatever. And so I was going to go and I was going to learn hardcore methods, and I was going to learn how to find the right answer. And you get to Harvard and you get to the program, and there's decision science, which is a very straightforward path of like, here's a set of methods and here's a set of assumptions and here's how you get a right answer. There's economics, same thing. Here's a set of assumptions, here's a set of procedures, here's how to get the right answer. And what I realized as I learned all these ways to get to the right answer is that the right answer really depended on your methodology, on your assumptions, on sort of the perspective you were taking. And what I understood there, and particularly working with Bob Blendon, or getting exposed to Bob Blendon, who was a public opinion specialist, was that this idea that values and that politics and that people's beliefs provide constraints to policy debates. And it was a really scary time, because these other paths, if I wanted to be a decision scientist or a health economist, they were very clear what I would do next, and where my jobs would be and where I would get funding for projects and all that stuff. what was harder was Bob's path, right? Because Bob was this very jovial, I don't know how many of you have ever gotten a chance to see him present. He's very funny, he presents, but he wasn't really considered a scientist, right? He does this soft public opinion stuff, right? Anybody can do public opinion stuff. And there wasn't an appreciation for that methodology that goes behind all the work that we do. And there's a much less clear path about what you do if you study politics and public opinion in terms of what career path that leads you to. And so for me, this was a moment where I once again got exposed that there were a lot of other paths than I had known were available. It was scary in that I had to decide to take a path that was much less clear and just trust I was going to figure it out. I also had to check my ego, because this decision science and economics and everything was hard science. And I was going to be I wanted to be smart. I wanted to be a hard scientist. I wanted to be that. I had to check my ego and really recognize that public opinion and that the influence of politics and of values and beliefs on outcomes is as important as being able to throw a whole bunch of things into a scientific model and come up with an outcome that might not actually mean anything, because it's all about your assumptions. So these are sort of some of my lessons from this time. I also found my methodology, right? So what I learned, and for me, numbers was always easier than words. And I learned that there was a methodology. There was a survey research methodology. There was a way to quantitatively really think about values, beliefs, influence, exposure to information, all those kinds of stuff. I could put all that together in a real methodology, in a quantitative way, which of course is what I was more comfortable with. And I found sort of what was going to be the basis of the rest of my career. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna go really quick. So then in the meantime, I spent, I joined KFF at that point, and I'm gonna talk about that next, but all through my KFF time, I also was involved in AAPOR. And I became AAPOR president. And as some of you may or may not know, the AAPOR president gives a presidential address every year. And this was another really critical moment in my sort of becoming who I am today as a leader, I think, and as an organizational leader. Certainly all these activities allowed me to learn how to run meetings and how to put together agendas and how to be a committee person and how to get listen to different voices. But it was when I had to decide what my presidential address was going to be about and really sort of have my own voice on an issue that really took a lot of self-reflection. And I want to try to do this super quick because I'm running out of time. But I had a list of fears. I kind of knew what I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to talk about the lack of diversity and inclusion in AAPOR. At the time, we can talk about it in Q&A, but there was a lot of issues. There was a lot of things that were really apparent. But I had a lot of fears about raising that issue. Who am I to call out this topic? I'm a white, cisgendered, Jewish woman. I've, have some experience with some versions of slight discrimination, but who am I? Like, secondly, it's a soft topic, right? This is something a woman would talk about, not a man, right? The man does hard science, and all the previous, AAPOR presidents had talked about real hard science issues and survey research. And so am I doing a disservice to my gender? I'm finally a woman AAPOR president. There had not been one of us in a long time. Am I doing a disservice to a woman by taking on a soft topic about an internal organizational issue as opposed to a big macro important industry-wide issue? If that makes sense to you? I'm not an expert in diversity and inclusion, right? I've never formally studied it. Who am I to talk about that topic? There are more urgent priorities. At the time, we were dealing with TCPA and a bunch of other issues, really hard issues to our industry. I should be talking about one of those hard issues. Anyway, the bottom line is, and we can talk a lot more about how I came to it, but I finally just was brave and just said what I needed to say. And that speech then launched a whole series of activities within AAPOR that I'm really, really proud of. And so I think for me, the ultimate lesson, I think a lesson is that voicing your fears and your worries and being really honest about what you're afraid of leads you to actually stand up and be the kind of leader or the kind of person that you want to be in your industry and for your community. So that was that lesson. Okay, moving on to my 26 years at KFF. There's really for a conversation like this in a short period of time, I think that the most important things that come from this are that, one, you can grow and your role can change within a given organization. And I think I'm really proof of that. And what I came in to do, to start a public opinion program and to lead a public opinion program and to build a public opinion program, and now what I'm doing now more broadly organizational wise, is a path for people. And it meant that I learned a lot on the job. It meant that I made a lot of mistakes on the job. It meant that I learned a lot from my networks, from my community, from my friends who were mentors, from my teammates, and from the people who were working with me. The second biggest lesson from my whole experience at KFF is the importance of teams and the importance of working with people that you respect and that you value and that you care about. And if any of you know about our poser team, you know that even though it has ebbed and flowed in terms of who really is working at KFF at a time, as a whole, the poser team has been an incredibly powerful and interconnected and close group of people who I think care deeply about each other, deeply about our work, and deeply about our mission. And I think that has what has allowed me to blossom and to grow and to take on other roles and to do other things at KFF. So I am going to stop there because there's so much more I can talk about. And these are just a few of those things. And some of these, I mean, like at KFF, I learned how to conduct research in South Africa, right? I learned how to conduct, research after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. These are fascinating topics. They're really hard topics, and they're not things I ever learned in a course. They're not things I ever got taught by somebody. There were things that I had to work out on the ground with colleagues at other organizations, our survey firms themselves, people on the ground, people in the, who were dealing, directly with the hurricane, for example. But these are all just like, I guess my point is that a career can be fascinating and interesting, and you're going to continue to learn throughout it. Okay, next. So you should take away from this that there are a breadth of options that you don't even know exist, and don't be afraid to follow the less clear path. I think ultimately, and this is my third point, like follow your passions, like the things that are hitting you in your gut and that you know are the right things. If you trust that, you're gonna figure out a path through to fulfilling choices. And then network, talk to people, listen to people, and care a lot about who you're working with and the teams you're a part of. Because at the end of the day, as proud as I am of a lot of the work I've done, I'm much more proud of the people I know and of the relationships I've built and of the friendships I've built, and really of the family I've built over this amazing career I've been lucky enough to have. I'm gonna stop there. Oh, and you should go to Machu Picchu. It's a whole nother story. Bye.
Thank you very much there, Molly. Really appreciate that. And I'm curious to see one of the things I love about this is, I've always looked at Molly, as a leader in the healthcare space or in public opinion or in AAPOR. And I think it's very important if you look at the slides of all the other things that each of our speakers would love to talk about. When you get to a conference, I always find myself at the AAPOR conferences or PAPOR conferences talking about research, but I never even thought to talk about wine with Molly or any of those other topics. So it's, all these people, they're professional researchers, but they're also people as well. So thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to hand it over to Jessica Broome. Jessica and I met at an AAPOR conference years ago. I think we were talking about this is, for those of you who haven't been to an AAPOR conference, I think the conversation that Jessica and I had was the most canonical AAPOR thing. She gave a presentation on the importance of hello, like the first word on a phone survey, and I think it was like, you had me at hello. And so AAPOR conferences, I say, are places where researchers can go and practice their Klingon. They can talk about really, really things that if I was at any other place in my life and I was talking about the importance of the hello in a phone survey, my wife would kill me. But at AAPOR, it's like you end up getting a group of people talking through, like you have me at hello. So Jessica, I'm going to pass on to you here, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it is, who you are, and then go to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Bob. That was great. I had forgotten about our fateful introduction at AAPOR so many years ago. So thank you all so much for having me. It's great to be here. As Bob mentioned, I'm Jessica Broome. I'm the founder of Southpaw Insights. I learned recently that a lot of people don't know Southpaw is a slang word for left-handed, and I am left-handed, which is why I named my company Southpaw. We're a research company. We do all kinds of primary research, quantitative and qualitative, to help our clients understand what people think and feel and do. Before I started Southpaw, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Cape Verde Islands. I spent some time working in state prisons and city jails all over New York. I got a PhD in survey methodology at the University of Michigan. So it's been a wild ride. I had a ton of fun. I can't wait to tell you about it. On the next slide, before I get too deep into my background, I wanted to talk a little bit about our work and some of the projects we have going on right now at Southpaw. So as I said, we do both qual and quant work. Right now, one of our big clients is Macy's, and they've engaged us to do shop-alongs where we interview people as we're walking around the store to get their input on store features and store design. So what do you like? What's working? What's not working? What should we change? That's something where I'll talk to probably 20 people one-on-one for an hour each, right? That's a qualitative study. We're also working on a big survey with people all around Dallas, asking them about local hospitals. It's a brand perception study, a 20-minute online survey among 1,500 people. So that's a quantitative study. And I always talk about the difference between quant and qual as, quant is for breadth. You ask questions of a lot of people. Qual is for the depth, where you sort of peel back the layers of the onion to really get a deeper understanding of people. So quant can tell you 80% of respondents, 80% of people like your product. Qual can really tell you why, sort of the why behind the numbers. And sometimes we'll do a project with both qual and quant components. Another one we have going on right now is with, it's a survey among 1,000 women, uninsured women, 18 to 34, asking them all about healthcare and access to birth control. And when we're done with the survey, we'll then go back and do a qualitative deep dive with a smaller number of women to get that depth and layers of understanding and the why behind the numbers that we came up with in the survey. Passions outside of work. I know Bob is very into people being well-rounded and doing things outside of work. I sometimes do things outside of work. I like my Peloton. I love going to yoga. Before COVID, I used to travel a ton, and I loved going to see shows on Broadway, see comedy. Now I mostly just watch a lot of Law and Order. But in all seriousness, I do think about work and read about work a lot because it is a passion. I love what we do. I love growing my team and building my business. That's my big passion right now, even though maybe it's made me a little less well-rounded than some people. On the next slide, this is my path, right? As I mentioned, I was in the Peace Corps after college. I taught middle school English and also ran a women's fitness group in the Cape Verde Islands. And at the end of that 2-year stint, we had someone come in from Peace Corps Washington to interview all the volunteers who were leaving and asked us a million questions about, how was your experience? How was your health? How was your training? How was your housing? And at the end of the interview, this woman asked me, so what are you going to do when you go back to the States? And I was like, I want your job. Like, what is this? I can just fly around the country, fly around the world and talk to people. Like, how do I get some of that? So I came back to the States, to New York City, and I looked for my first real job. And I was just searching for anything that had interview or survey in the job description. And I ended up working in criminal justice, interviewing incarcerated people in jails, city jails, and state prisons all around New York. After a few years of that, I went over to the corporate side, I had a few different jobs in PR and communications agencies, doing surveys and doing interviews and doing focus groups. So it was the same skill set that I had learned in the prison work, but just a very different environment. And I think that was a big learning for me, that like, oh, I'm learning these skills, I'm doing this stuff, and it applies everywhere from, Rikers Island to the boardroom. And I did that in working for agencies for a few years. I went out on my own as a freelance researcher. And Bob referenced this earlier, that I lived this digital nomad life for a while, bouncing around from New York to New Orleans to Thailand to Argentina. I was always just trying to escape the winter. I kind of just hate being cold. But at the time it was great. If I could get online, I could work. It was remote work before that became the norm. And it was a big adventure for a few years. Then in 2016, I sort of settled down back in New York City and started growing my team at Southpaw, that I will talk more about in a bit. But on the next slide, you can see where I went to school. I will say it took me a pretty long time to get through school, and I'm kind of happy about that. I had good experiences along the way. So I went to Connecticut College, studied sociology, and then I spent 5 years working after undergrad before I went to get my master's. I got a master's at night while I was working in New York. And then sat on that for another almost 5 years before I went to Michigan to get a PhD. The program at Michigan, I go back every summer. I'm actually in Ann Arbor, Michigan right now to teach a class in the Summer Institute in Survey Research Techniques, which I would encourage any or all of you to check out. There are tons of courses every summer, ranging from just a couple days to 2 months long, about all aspects of survey research. So it's a really good way to dip a toe in the waters if you haven't, if you're not ready to dive all the way into survey research from an academic angle. To professional associations, I've learned so much and met tons of people through professional organizations like AAPOR, which I think of as kind of a meeting point for academia and industry, but sort of slanted more academic. The QRCA is the professional association I am most involved in. That's the Qualitative Researchers Consultants Association. It's all qualitative research, just a great, very supportive network. If you're intrigued at all by qualitative work, I would check it out. QRCA offers tons of education. They have webinars all the time about everything. We have an annual conference that gives grants to students and young professionals. It's a really supportive organization. WIRE, Women in Research, is another super supportive, awesome organization. Also melds members across, both industry and academia. I would say that one is a little more industry focused, but also a great source of mentors and opportunities and connections. I also put WeBank on here, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. It's not research specific, but it's an organization I'm involved with. It's the certifying body for certified women-owned businesses, of which I am one. And then on the next slide, I get into some of the things that I wish I had more time to talk about. Supplier diversity, right? So I mentioned I'm a woman-owned business. In a nutshell, women-owned, minority-owned, LGBTQ-owned small businesses have historically not been well represented in corporate America. If you think about your typical white male CEO of a big company, maybe he needs to hire some kind of supplier, right? He needs a graphic designer or an IT firm or a research firm like us. By default, the people he knows, the only suppliers he's talking to are probably other white male-owned companies. So he's making deals with his buddies on the golf course, and I'm over here like a woman-owned business, like, hi, I'm here, hire me. Supplier diversity is this idea of making a conscious effort, companies or governments making a conscious effort to diversify their suppliers and get out of that white male CEO hamster wheel. some companies and governments now have a target. They say X% of our suppliers must be women-owned or minority-owned, diverse suppliers. Some companies offer great opportunities or education designed to uplift small and diverse suppliers. So one of our big clients right now is Capital One, the bank, and they have a one-year program for small women-owned businesses. It's like a crash course in how to run your business. And you have lectures from Capital One's head of marketing and their head of finance and their head of HR, all sort of geared towards it, almost like a boot camp crash course in getting your business off the ground. So that's one of the opportunities that came to me that really helped my business start to grow and solidify. I've also been really lucky to join this collective called Titanium Worldwide. We are a collective of 16 independent companies, all diverse suppliers, so women-owned, minority-owned, LGBTQ-owned, and everyone has a different specialty. So there's a creative agency and a PR agency and us, the research company, and we all sort of join together to serve much bigger accounts, bigger clients, do bigger projects than any of us could do on our own. And that brings me to my top 3 takeaways on the next slide. And Molly said almost the exact same thing. So I guess either I'm copying off of her, or we're just so aligned that we had the same idea. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And who they know. I think I've alluded to this, like all my opportunities have come through people I know, people I met, people I talked to at a lunch at a random AAPOR conference. I would tell anyone who's in school or early in their career, or really anyone at all, like talk to everyone. You never know where it might take you, or who they might introduce you to, or what kind of great idea or connection or opportunity or job offer or whatever else you might get just from having a conversation with someone. My other life tip on here, misery is optional. My mom tells me this all the time. I hope you can tell from listening to me and probably everyone else on here today that I really love this field. I love it both in a macro sense, like I love the idea that we can go out and talk to people and give them an opportunity to be heard, and then we can sort of change the direction of a brand or a product or public policy. And then on the more micro level, I just love crafting that perfect survey question that gets the idea across, or doing a focus group where someone says something and I'm like, yes, that's it. It's like the perfect insight, the perfect phrase. And I hope for all of you, maybe early in your careers or considering a career in research, I hope you love it as much as I do. And if you don't, I hope you find something that you do love this much, because I would say life is too short to not love your job. It's where you spend a lot of time, and you really should be happy. And to think outside the box. I think Molly sort of alluded to this as well, right? Your career, your path in life does not have to be a perfectly straight line, no matter what anyone tells you. I spent 15 years just getting through school. Most researchers I know came to the field in a really roundabout way and have really interesting journeys. If someone on my team used to be a lawyer, someone else used to be a journalist. I taught middle school for 2 years. I think it's all these experiences we have that make us great and empathetic researchers and interesting people. This is we're supposed to put something we're proud of or excited about on this slide. This is my team. We celebrated International Left-Handers Day together last week because Southpaw. And I'm so proud of this motley crew of people and what we've done and how much fun we have and the work we do and what we're building. So thanks for listening to me and my story.
Thanks, Jessica. Really appreciate that, and looking forward to coming back to questions with you here. And for our third speaker here, we're going to present Floyd Ciruli. Let me spotlight you here. Floyd, give me a second. Great. So again, Floyd and I actually met through a PAPOR conference, spent many of nights talking research and wine and travel. So it's I know we talked a lot about Italy, so I'm looking forward to hear from you, Floyd.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for putting this together. I really enjoyed the Jessica and Mollyann, great presentations. I founded Ciruli Associates, which is what I'm most noted for in Colorado in the 1980s. And it was sort of unique in that I had a public policy company that did demographics and polling, opinion research. It worked with the media and campaign management. This is fairly common today. You find many firms that are in that field and bring everything like that together and don't necessarily have different individuals, professionals handling it. And so I run campaigns. They were nonpartisan campaigns for the most part. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but that's what I've been doing to a large extent since the 1980s. About 8 years ago, 9 years ago, a woman that I met at the AAPOR conference wanted to start a program with an investment and a gift that she had. She was near Princeton, and she knew that in Princeton, the amount of her gift would get you maybe a closet, but at the University of Denver, it would get you a program, and indeed it did. And so I've been running that program largely because I knew her and I was on a board at DU, and we've tried to expand it and make it very unique and useful for the residents of that area, and obviously the students and the school. The next slide. I actually first heard about PAPOR in 2003. I was in California, and you all were having one of your regular recall elections, and PAPOR often has its meetings up in San Francisco. Fortunately, Rob drags it down here periodically for a session, but they met in the fall prior to that election at, I believe, Universal City. And I got to see the incredible, great pollsters in California, including the two Marks, who are still very busy, Mark Baldassare and Mark DiCamello, who are still doing well-quoted polls in this state, and many others, the team, including Ms. Darling from the Los Angeles Times at that time. And wow, I said, this is not only is this a crazy state, but this would be a great organization if you are really interested in survey research. And so I would just throw it as a little pitch out that one of the things on Bob's list there that will come up will be probably a conference of some type in December, obviously dealing with the pandemic, but nonetheless a conference. And we almost always have something on what were the last big elections and what will that do for the next elections. I've always enjoyed those. I run a Japanese diplomatic program, which has been just fabulous, and frankly, the Japanese were quite happy to be online and to be on Zoom, which none of us really knew much about a year and a half ago. But we run the entire program with our professors and Japanese professors on Zoom, and then also at the school, and this is something that I think for those of you who are involved in academics still, the public is dying to hear a lot about what's going on in elections. And of course, the last election, I ran this program in October and November in the last election, and we had huge audiences in Denver and used our experts around the Denver area, including our academic experts. I mentioned the Ciruli Associates before. I would only point out that you can, the thing I will be most noted for among Coloradans, and I've built large water projects and helped build them, and because we do the public policy work and lots of polling and a little bit of politics behind the scenes and media, a lot of things, and libraries, our central library in Denver. But cultural funding will be number one issue that I'll be remembered for over the years because of the fact that it provides money very uniquely for the zoo and for opera and for the art museum, and it's still around. It's been operating now for more than 30 years. It has to be renewed every so often, I've helped them on several occasions, but it's very popular, and I'll be remembered for that. But everything that I've done in terms of Ciruli Associates, say, for example, has provided a database which I can then use to be a commentator. And I became a commentator on the largest television station, on the largest radio station in what used to be the Rocky Mountain News and now is the Denver Post. And I blog almost every day, but at least frequently. I also am I've become a speaker, and I'm now a Zoom speaker. We have almost no physical presence in Denver to get people together. We think we are in September. We're now getting a little nervous, but we're pretty sure we are. The only thing I would say about my passions outside of work is that along with reading the daily news and things like Opinion Today, we now have so much opinion data that is available that you can look at on a regular basis if you're trying to track things. So that, for example, I'm about to blog on what happened in Afghanistan. And I had done a blog on the fact that the public was in favor of getting out of Afghanistan. And the president actually mentioned that, Biden. Well, the latest poll, which is just a snap poll, obviously very quickly, it shows that it dropped by 20 points from 69% to now 49%. And of course, it may continue to drop depending on how it turns out. But number one, the data is available. And number two, data and public opinion is dynamic. It is interesting. And if you're a person that likes to talk about it, and possibly publicly talk about it, but if also you just like the type of research you're interested in, it's fabulous and available. On the next slide. My education started at UCLA, and I got a BA, and I had the good fortune of dealing with a Professor Austin, who was doing the huge survey of high school students. It's something that UCLA still continues to do. In those days, we had holograph cards. You walked around with this deck of cards, and you went over to the central computer, and it would read them, and you would get an SPSS printout of your crosstabs. It was primitive, but once you learn the basics, you start to learn it. You'll notice I took law school, and Bob sort of referenced that as how did law get fit in here, primarily because what I was mostly interested in, and one reason why I went to Georgetown, was public policy. And so that you are immediately at the government. You are talking about all types of, and if you watch news shows today, you'll see a lot of professors from Georgetown. And when I was there, many of them were serving on the Rodino Committee and the Irvin Committee, which were trying to impeach the president, because I was there in 1974. And so consequently, there was just a tremendous amount of public policy. But the other thing is, you'll notice at the same time, I took a whole host of courses in statistics and marketing and media management. American University had a great program in campaign management. It still does. And the agriculture department, if you want to know statistics, where do statistics come from? Counting sheep, the agriculture department, the U.S. agriculture, one of the biggest statistical shops in the country, and they offer a lot of courses. Everybody's mentioned AAPOR and PAPOR is a great place to learn things. I would throw out locally the press club. They have not only do you stay in touch with the people that are in it and the ethics of the media, and so much polling is in the media, you want to be very, very aware of that the AAPOR rules are basically logical and common sense and very similar to what the media thinks about. You also meet a lot of interesting people. I go to presidential libraries because there's lots of speaking and a lot of interesting exhibits. Every month I'm online, probably for the Getty. They have great things that I'm interested in particular ancient history. But a lot of you may not be a member or aware of OLLI, and it is a foundation associated with almost every university, and it. I often speak at it, but I just know so many people that learn things from it, including wine that Mollyann is most interested in. It's a great place to learn just about anything. Next slide. By the way, down at the bottom there, I had the Denver Athletic Club, and the only thing I ever say about that is very seldom will your clients and possibly your boss, but certainly not your clients, will say, Floyd, you should go to the gym, take some time off. In other words, while you're doing all this work, you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your family and your life, and just continuing to be a full person. That club was one place where I managed to do that. I put in more than 4. I'm just going to go through them fairly quickly, because the Ambassador Hotel, that was just a passion as a young man. I was at that point, even before UCLA, I was knocking around in other colleges here in the Los Angeles area. And I walked into the office on Wilshire Boulevard. Nobody was there. All the young people at that time worked for Eugene McCarthy, who was running for president also, and probably maybe had a step up on Bobby Kennedy. But I immediately was hired. They said, "You're great. You're in the advanced team, Ciruli. Go to the airport and pick up an advertisement." I didn't know exactly where the airport was, and I didn't know exactly what an advertisement was in terms of this huge film in those days, disc. But you volunteer and do it for something that you have passion for. And I would just throw out political campaigns or ballot issue campaigns, because they're like walking into PAPOR. You could end up being on the council in a few weeks, because they're always looking for interesting people, and certainly in a year or two you could be on a council. I worked for the Sagamore Hotel, which is the best hotel in upstate New York. And I simply throw that out there because I think hospitality, for those of you who have been in hospitality, those of you who do a little hospitality, Jessica's sort of in the hospitality business herself in terms of walking around supermarkets and a lot of the sort of commercial research she does. You learn people, you learn what their values are, you deal with them. It's just a great place to go. As I mentioned, I loved Washington, D.C. because I immediately went into Congress. And what I learned is that polling and public opinion is essential to moving legislation. Mollyann, as you remember, learned that right at her first job. That's where you see that in Washington, D.C. I first got involved with, say, water. I went to Washington, or I came back to Colorado when my congressman retired, and they said, "Ciruli, we need somebody to manage the census out here." This is at the ground level where they have mailed them out. A lot of these forms are going to come back, and a lot of them aren't. And they then hire several hundred people to go out, called enumerators, and bring the forms in. It's changed somewhat these days, but that's how it took place in 1980. But what that taught me is 2 things. Data is as important as that is, say, demographic data is as important as opinion data. You want to put them together in all of your research. I also throw in election data and sometimes some commercial data or media data, but generally this taught me all about, and particularly in Colorado, I became an expert and was often quoted on the demographics of Colorado. But it also taught me that I can manage, and I had never had any experience with it, manage several hundred people. They've got a system that lets you do that, and that was wonderful. I went into television as I'm now building up this background in Colorado, knowing a lot of things. I did my first survey for Channel 7 in 1983. It was an exit poll. For those of you who have ever been involved with an exit poll, they're not around too much anymore. They're like miraculous. You never know exactly, particularly if the election is close, and these were incredibly close mayoral elections. But I was right, and I became immediately a guru, and it served me well. Of course, I had to. Fortunately, most of the other surveys were correct too, but they were not exit polls, which were one of the most difficult things to do. I was asked to manage a campaign. This first, I call it the CATS campaign. That was that campaign for culture. People just came up to me and said, "Would you do this?" I don't know. It sounds interesting. I learned some management. I knew polling. I'd studied a lot about campaigns, and it came together. And that turned out to be a very big part of my life and my work in the future. And it's now a legacy. It's something that I look back on and say, I did that. These organizations I joined, after a short period of time, I became the president of them. All of them are, as something I mentioned to you, after a few years, these organizations are dying for somebody to move up and to join their councils, join their boards, and be a leader if you want to. But in any event, you meet such unbelievably cool people. And then finally, I mentioned to you, just by circumstance, at an AAPOR meeting, I met Helen Crossley. She had a bequest, a gift to give, to start a program to represent her dad and also herself in terms of her interest in foreign affairs, and we got to start that program. So you can see it's been, sort of moving around there, but all of those things are somewhat just luck, but each thing sort of fits in with you learn something before. Why don't we do the page? If I had further time to talk about those years up there, I'm very interested in ancient history. I'm currently reading a lot about the Renaissance. In other words, there's moments in which 2000 was about the height of the Roman Empire, where a lot of what's going on starts to fall apart. And I sort of feel like that's to some extent happening in Western civilization at the moment. We're under a lot of stress. On the other hand, the Renaissance says you look back at the past and you can be reborn. And that's sort of exciting. 68, I mentioned before, that was the year. I look right now and everybody says, oh, democracy is falling apart. And I say, you should have been there in 1968. We truly believe that the late 60s, early 70s, this country was coming completely unglued. Different than today, but nonetheless, I think we'll make it. I do believe that what happened in 2020 is going to be something, not only obviously the pandemic, but also in terms of that election, is something that none of us are going to forget, and we're going to keep teaching it and talking about it. I just did a presentation on democracy and the polling in the 2020 election. AAPOR has done a lot of work on this. I borrowed things from them, but nonetheless, my thought is that as democracy is in crisis, polling is in crisis. That's one of the things I think is affecting polling, because so much of what we're hearing now in our political arguments are contrary to science, are contrary to the media, are critical of the media, and frankly affecting polling and how people respond to polling. I don't have to say much about how important it is for public policy. I think Molly did a good job about that, but it is essential. There is no political campaign, whether it's for a ballot initiative or for a politician, that doesn't have a lot of polling in it. You can be sure right now, President Biden is getting a lot of polling data. And the interesting thing is we all know that there's tremendous, because of the 2020 election, to some extent, there's a lot of changes being discussed right now in survey methodology. Is telephones over? The latest AAPOR report out says no, that actually telephones with good weighing and good methodology are still going to be around, but we are moving on to just a lot of other methodologies. So that's a lot to talk about. And then finally, the sort of the final takeaway slide here is that I suggest, it certainly affects me, that if I'm going to present something, and it can just be to your colleagues, it can just be to a class, but it also could be much broader. That's when you really get yourself organized. You start thinking about what you're going to say. And then I try to write about 200 words a day that's going to get published. I really work at it. There's nothing better than that. Secondly, never stop learning. I think everybody mentioned that. Work experience, travel, education, libraries, friends, they're all your teachers and mentors. What did the pandemic teach us? Be adaptable and be resilient. You've got to be ready to make the changes. From listening to my parents, it was the Great Depression, and then World War II. Then I talked to, more recently, it was 9/11 and the Great Recession. But I have grandchildren, and the pandemic is going to be the thing that'll stand out the most in their lives. It changed their schoolwork, it changed their career directions, it changed their sports and activities. As kids, we will remember this, and obviously we've all adapted. And then finally, I say, be loyal to your code. What I'm talking about there is that in terms of my research code, I trust my data. when I do everything I can to get the methodology down correctly. But when I see it, and I often am public about it, or I'm talking to my clients about it, I trust it. I go with it. I argue that there's a margin of errors, and there's could be a different viewpoint here, but nonetheless, I trust my data. Secondly, I trust the public. I think public opinion research is the ultimate democratic activity, because when we are in an election cycle, for example, and we're doing polling, we do everything we can. We spend all of our time trying to figure out how to get people into our surveys, not how to get them out of our surveys, which you're seeing now going on in some states and in some legislatures. So we work hard at trying to include people. And so I think that public opinion, which is one reason why you see in autocratic countries, public opinion is suppressed and constrained or non-existent, is because it is a democratic activity. And finally, I believe, and I mentioned that in terms of both the AAPOR code, but also the media, you be objective. To the extent that there's other polls out there that are contrary to yours, or to the extent that you don't want to just argue a position, you want to make sure that you are offering what the data really provides. And that was something that Archibald Crossley got in trouble with, arguing with Lyndon Johnson, because Lyndon didn't want to release all the poll in New Hampshire that showed he was doing lousy. He just wanted to release one little area of New Hampshire that showed him beating Gene McCarthy. And Crossley said no. Needless to say, he never worked again for the Democratic National Committee, but he was happy. He went on to and continued his great business in New York City. But be true to your code, be objective, and you will find in this, the last slide is that all I would say is what everybody else said, that this is a great profession. You're going to meet great people, and you can definitely fulfill your passions. You just decide what they are and go after them. Thank you, Bob.
Great, thank you, Floyd. Now, if Molly and Jessica, if you wouldn't mind also turning yourself on, and anyone who wants to turn on the camera now, it's always much nicer to kind of see everyone in person here, if you don't mind. Let's see, add spotlight. Not me, you. Add spotlight. Cool. We have time here for some questions. Let me just make sure we get this. There we go. Let's talk about questions. Does anyone have any? And feel free to unmute yourself, and just I'll call on you or raise your hand if you'd like. So I did get one question on the chat, and I'll start off with this for everyone. This is for each person. We've talked a little bit about how your path has changed through life, and it's non-linear. The question is, if you could have done anything differently on your paths, what would that be?
I know.
Go ahead, Molly.
I'm a people pleaser, and I didn't know, especially early on, that you had like agency. And so I was leaving Harvard, and I was going to go work for Drew Altman at KFF. And Drew and Bob Blunden, who I worked with at Harvard, and they were very close friends. And because of some demands that Bob Blunden had on me after I had defended my dissertation and finished some stuff, I couldn't leave Boston until like this one particular Friday. And Drew said that I had to start working that Monday. I literally left a PhD program, and on a Friday, basically, I left a big part of my life, and on a Monday flew across the country, and on a Monday started my brand new job. And that is the stupidest thing I've ever done. And every one of you, take a break between big opportunities and use that time wisely and argue for it and negotiate it. And like, I will never, ever, ever, I won't ever let anybody do such a silly thing ever. That's my difference.
Okay. How about you, Jessica?
Oh, something I would have done differently. in my path. I've actually made the same mistake that Mollyann just mentioned of like finishing a job on Friday and starting a new one on a Monday. I would never do that. And yeah, I would echo that idea of like saying no, setting boundaries. A lot of times people will come up to you and say like, hey, especially in graduate school, hey, this is a great opportunity for you, which usually means it's a lot of work for no money. And sometimes great opportunities are great opportunities, but maybe I would have parsed through the opportunities a little better and been a little more choosy about what I took.
Great. And Floyd, is there anything you would have done differently on your path?
So much of my path, and I think also of Mollyann and Jessica's involved a little bit of serendipity. Just something happened that moved you in a certain direction. And as you can see, that that list I put up showed a lot of different directions, and almost all of them were fun and would have no doubt have been interesting careers. I could have stayed in Congress, for example, and worked on the Hill or gone into the bureaucracy. But I would say that the thing that I think was the right decision was to come home in Colorado and try and organize my own small firm. And my only question I have today is, looking back over it, would I have been better off? Jessica, as I can see, has built a big firm. Would I have been better off building a large firm? Possibly not as big, because I didn't want to be national or international, but certainly in Colorado I could have. And on the other hand, I've had incredible flexibility, which sometimes you don't have if you have partners or other people that are investors, et cetera. And so I've enjoyed just sort of being the professional and running it. I would say that I got so lucky that when the offer to, and I just added it to my workload, I just took on starting to teach and set up the Crossley Center, because that really was a nice capstone, something really fun to do at the end. And I just am very, what total luck that it happened. But I'm just thankful that I didn't say, no, I'm busy. This was something you want to do. So I would just say to people, if you get you never know where it's going to come from, but if you see an opportunity, you should take it.
Great, thanks. Constantia, I just want to, first of all, give a little shout out to UCLA out there. We have two of our speakers from UCLA, and Constantia is from my MBA program. So I'm excited to hear from you.
Go Bruins.
I'm going to ask you to unmute there real quick.
To unmute myself. Thank you. I'm just, thank you for the reminder. Great talks. I really enjoyed everyone's perspectives and background. I had a question, which is, these days, big topic in survey research is the non-response bias, because it's harder and harder to reach certain types of populations, or even when you're doing like phone research and calling and so on. Not everyone picks up the phone. So I'm just interested in the speakers. What tricks have you used to boost response rates? Because, once a person is part of your simple random sample or your stratified sample, like if you can't reach that person, it's going to be a big deal up to a certain point. So how do you go about, what tricks have you used that have worked to reach your sample?
I'm happy to offer one thing that we do. So we are still, and it costs us a fortune, do very traditional telephone dialing. We do about 75% of our sample comes from cell phones, about 75, 80 from cell phones, about a quarter to 20% in landlines. But one of the things that we've done, particularly to make sure, because for our work, it's so important that we're giving voice to underrepresented groups in the healthcare system. So particularly the ones who are most disadvantaged, and those groups are among the hardest to get in any kind of sample. We do an awful lot of including the prepaid number as part of our sampling list. So that what we include an oversample of numbers that are coming from prepaid phones, and those phones are disproportionately used by lower income and particularly Black and Hispanic populations. And so by going to that extra step and including those in our sampling frame, we end up doing better getting some of the hardest to reach populations. So that's one of our tricks.
Okay, great.
And I will make a pitch. Jessica, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to make a pitch for overall. That is an exact type of a topic that in AAPOR there's a lot of discussion about, and a lot of heated topics about it. And the perfect. This is the exact type of questions we often debate. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I actually did my dissertation on telephone survey interviewers and how they can increase response rates just in the words that they use and their vocal characteristics. It's ironic because now I do almost no phone work. And if I ever have a client who wants it, I send them right to Bob. But, the overarching finding, without getting deep in the weeds of my dissertation, was that being responsive to people and reacting to their concerns and sort of mirroring their speech patterns can actually have an impact. Obviously it's not going to make someone answer the phone who was never going to answer the phone anyway, but that is one thing to keep in mind. When we're recruiting, especially for qual projects, we also focus a lot on underrepresented groups. And I think one of the things we've been doing more and more lately is really meeting people where they are. If it's partnering with a community group to go out in the community and find people who we never would have gotten from a traditional research panel. And it makes it, it changes the design of the study a bit and shifts how we have to do things. But the point is that you're giving someone a voice who wouldn't have had a voice otherwise. So
right.
In terms of for elections, say, for example, and I mean, prior to it, you have a client that simply wants to know, should we do this or not? Should we offer this to the electorate? Is there any chance for it? In a state like Colorado, telephoning is still probably a primary way to operate, particularly in smaller jurisdictions, because they're simply not good panels set up and available. It's getting better and better, but it's still it's difficult. But we are, for the most part, trying to do some type of advance. We work off a registration list, and we do some type of advanced notification to get people's names in, to strengthen the possibility that they're going to cooperate. It also gives us a way to target. As Mollyann pointed out, underserved. We usually do that by geography, sometimes by last name, but that gives you an ability to do that. But I know very few people today that simply buy a list. And this was the way I certainly did it through most of the 90s. Buy a list. I would register voters' phone numbers and start dialing. And we would do everything we thought was appropriate over several days, including the weekends, and lots of callbacks and all the techniques we had. But I think that that's over for the most part. I just don't think you're going to connect with that alone anymore. And as Bob said, the latest, what's our journal called, Mollyann?
Public Opinion Quarterly.
The quarterly just came out, and that's the topic. The first item is on is there any future? Thank you. Is there any future in telephone surveys? And the answer was yes. There's limits, and obviously there's going to be these by and large random techniques out there that we're all going to use because they're cheaper. But nonetheless, telephone surveys are probably going to stay around for a while. But they're expensive, as Mollyann pointed out, and they have to be weighed properly. The other thing they point out, Mollyann, is that without, and I think 75% cell phones absolutely where it is, at least. And maybe there's some jurisdictions here, if you're doing it in Boulder here, it's 90%, i.e. students. That's the only way you're going to find them. So that'll be one of the techniques. But we're also shifting to just about everything else. I know you do lots of panels, Mollyann, and we're just all doing multiple techniques. The second article in the journal is on how we are all adapting to other approaches to augment whatever survey research we're doing.
Great, thank you.
I've got a question. I think it's more geared towards Molly and Jessica, but because Floyd, you tend to be leading up your shop, alone on that, or for the most part. But Molly and Jessica, I've met many members of your team, and what are the things you look for? And this is true for you, Floyd. When you're hiring people or adding people to your team, what are the things you're looking for, particularly for new researchers? People are coming out, just coming out, maybe fresh PhDs or fresh college graduates.
I think you want to go? Yeah.
Sure. I think one of the big things is people who can really write, who can write for different audiences. Academic writing is very different from business writing, but I've been a little amazed at some young people right out of school that I've met recently who really don't have a solid grasp on just general English grammar. So I think written communication is a key skill to work on that I look at. Someone who's a big thinker, good thinker, who can sort of see the big picture and draw connections between different things. I think that's important. I don't want anyone who sort of has blinders on. And then I think Floyd mentioned people working in hospitality. I really do. I think I learned more about how to run a business from being a waitress than anything else. So I love it when people talk about, oh, my first job, oh, as a camp counselor, oh, as a bartender, and that I feel like you've learned skills from those jobs that you really carry forward into real jobs. So people who can apply those skills are always a welcome addition to the team.
Those are all what we look for too. Some of the other things that I think about are, really passion, mission driven, and sort of interested and committed to learning, and sort of recognize that they might not know everything. Like that, somebody's open to coaching and mentoring and learning from the people around you. Sometimes there's just not coming in with sort of an expectation that you immediately know everything, and then for us, and it's interesting that Jessica was talking about writing skills, which is true, but I also find that, there's a different level in just comfort with numbers. And in our field, right, it's one thing whether you know or don't know how to, run SPSS or can write an R or whatever. And those are great skills that we really value if you have them. But even if you don't have those, if you have a real comfort with numbers and understanding bases and percentages, and can just like understand kind of, a comfort writing about numbers. I mean, it's interesting. Some people do and some people don't. And some people who want to be good, there's people I've met or we've hired who have a passion for research, but they're not good at numbers. And it takes a little while to realize that. And so again, I think that in all of our stories, there's an element of following your passion, but also knowing where your talents and skills lie and where you can enhance those and where you have to let go of some things. Like, I am never going to be a novelist. I am never going to want to sit down and write things beautifully. That is not me. But I'm always going to want to work with numbers, and I'm always going to want to think about and I think that way. I think about stuff like that. So people who have that passion for understanding sort of people, but especially in this world, as we've talked about, you're giving voice to people, you're representing people's lives, but you're doing it in both qualitative and quantitative ways, and being able to do that with thoughtfulness. So those are some of the things I look for.
Bob asked, we give out scholarships, and 45 people applied for the scholarship, and I asked them to do a 300-word essay on one of two different public opinion topics. So 300 words. So both Mollyann and Jessica, writing, you got to be able to write. And frankly, the shorter, the tougher sometimes it is to write, because you really have to be contained. Mollyann's statement of comfortable with data, because there's a public opinion data in the question, and it's a public opinion type of question. So at least they have to be able to talk about it, and then and be comfortable with it. And then finally, they have to be somewhat objective. They have to be able to back away and say, this is where the data is going. And if they use I a lot in it, or if they, if obviously they have a huge position and it may or may not run with the data, that's okay. And, you know, we can, if you were trying to hire them, you might ask some other questions. But in terms of this, that got you marked down a little bit, because, you know, I got 45 people and I've got 8 awards. Do not use I would be my advice when you were applying.
Great. Well, I just want to take this moment to thank everyone for, especially you, Floyd, and Jessica and Molly for spending the time, but everyone in general here who's joined in out there in the Zoom audience. This is what PAPOR is all about, is the community getting together, sharing their stories, and following up with each other to just get through the pandemic, the continual education, and just having fun with each other. Jessica, I think it was you who said, I'm very much a fan of 360. And you're in that spot right now, Jessica, as your company, you're thinking, but you've actually been one of the people who's taught me 360 as you embraced your passion of travel, and just as Floyd talked about, going to, in the culture and giving back to the community, modeling through your team, developing your team. This is definitely a big piece of how we all get through this, get through life together. So again, just want to thank you all for contributing to this. As a reminder, we've got a couple upcoming PAPOR events. There's a luau this Thursday. The papor.org website is really the place to go for all the information. But definitely from a student paper competition, this is always a great way for students to reach out and contribute, get published, give a chance to present. It's just a great community over there. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and we will look forward to in the November the next PAPOR Speaker Series. Have a good day, everyone.